Yes.
Okay.
I think they kept the line open. Because the same people are going to be attending that.
Okay, so we've got about a minute or so before we're going to get started, and if you notice, we had a pretty full agenda, so we're going to try to stay on time today. Real quickly.
Is your mic up?
Yes. So we're being broadcast now.
Yes.
Should I say the password out loud?
Yeah.
Okay. There does seem to be a little bit of Wi-Fi issue in the room, but for those who don't have the password, it is FCC 823302. Sure. FCC 823302. And the F, C, and C are all capitalized. So welcome, and thanks everybody for taking time to come down to the commission today or joining by phone. I also want to give a special thank you to Liz Barquette and CCA for providing lunch for us, and that should show up around noon. So we get a meal out of this, so thank you, Liz. We're very appreciative. Let's start by going around the table and doing introductions. I'm going to start with Scott Marshall to my right.
Hi, it's Scott Marshall with the CGB, and I staff the committee. I think I've met everybody though. Yeah, I think so. Good to have you here. Thanks very much for coming.
Hi, Susan Grant, Consumer Federation of America.
Ross Lieberman, American Cable Association. Hi, Mark Reichert, American Foundation for the Blind, also joined by my colleague Sarah Malaire.
Zainab El-Kebsi, National Association of the Deaf, representative of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Consumers and Advocacy Network.
Carmen Scarrato with the National Hispanic Media Coalition.
Olivia Wine, National Consumer Law Center, and I'm here with my colleague, Margaret Saunders.
Krista Witanowski, CTIA.
Liz Barquette with CCA.
Hi, it's John Schwantes, Consumers Union.
Jim Graves, EPIC.
Larry Walk, NAB.
Kenneth Mallory, National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, and I am joined by our alternate, Thaddeus Johnson.
Mitsuko Herrera with the National Association of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors in Montgomery County, and I believe that my colleague Rick Elrod from Fairfax County as an alternate will also be here.
Steve Morris from NCTA.
Sarah Kamal from Public Knowledge.
Steve Posios with the American Consumer Institute.
And on the phone?
Kevin Tagling for the Benton Foundation.
Sean Carroll, Massachusetts Department of Telecom and Cable.
Eric Null, OCI.
Paul Goodman, Center for Media Justice.
Lynn Follansby, U.S. Telecom.
Anyone else on the line? Okay, I wanted to say a special welcome to a couple new members who have replaced members with some of our organizations that had transitioned. Kevin Taglon with Benton Foundation is on the phone. Jim Graves with EPIC, welcome.
Thank you.
Amina is now switched from Benton to representing the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and she is on the phone as well. Carmen Scarrato, my apologies, with the National Hispanic Media Coalition, and Sarah Kamal with Public Knowledge. And Ken's.
Kevin Rupi from U.S. Telecom.
Okay, and Lynn's also on the phone from U.S. Telecom. So keeping us on track, Any logistical announcements, Scott? Just remember to raise your hand when you want to speak so that they recognize and activate your microphone. For those of you on the phone, I'm going to do my best effort to make sure that I stop and ask if you have questions, thoughts, or input. If I, for some reason, forget, please email Scott and myself, and we will get that information and then be more responsive to you. So that should keep us moving along.
That should keep us. It's Scott here. And yeah, you could call me. That's probably better. Ed has a lot to do here, and we'll pause because there's no way the folks on the phone while the mics are live can really interrupt us. So we've got to pause on a regular basis to make sure that you're able to participate fully.
Great. So first up today, we're going to have a Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau update. And we have a new acting bureau chief with CGB, Patrick Weber, and he's going to be joining us first. Nice to meet you. Thank you. So here? Yes, that's perfect.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the spring CAC plenary meeting. I want to thank Ed for his leadership of the committee, and also Scott for being our tireless designated federal officer. And I want to thank all of you for your dedication to the cause of consumer education, empowerment, and protection. About a month ago, I was privileged to be named by Chairman Pai as acting chief of CGB. This is sort of a homecoming for me, since I previously worked in CGB and focused a good deal of my time on consumer education and outreach, including the DTV transition, which I'm sure many of you remember. So I know firsthand the importance of continuous consumer engagement, and I'm excited to serve in my new role and to be working with you. Consumer issues are among the most important to the Commission. Soon after being named to lead the agency, Chairman Pai met with you to talk about his interest in and his support of consumer-related issues. And when he recently spoke about his first 100 days as chairman, he again listed consumer protection as among his highest priorities. We've seen some of these priorities already taking shape. In March, the Commission adopted an NPRM proposing ways for carriers to stop illegal robocalls before they reach consumers. We've also promoted broadband deployment in rural and unserved areas, taken steps towards greater disability access, and improved how we operate. You'll be hearing more about these topics on your agenda today, and there will be much more to come. While we plan to do a lot, we can't do it alone. We need your help. You are the experts on consumer education, on disclosures to help guide consumer choice, and on so many other things. I know you've already been thinking about things like helping consumers avoid illegal robocalls and how to more easily file complaints when consumers do receive them. So my thanks to you for all you've already done and for all you continue to do on behalf of American consumers. With that, I'll turn it over to two of my deputies who will give you updates on their areas of responsibility. They are Mark Stone and Karen Pelt-Strauss, and I believe Mark's going to go first. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. Nice to see you all here. I wanted to give you a short overview of what CGB has been doing in my area since y'all last met. So no surprises here. We've been hard at work addressing illegal robocalls. In March, as Patrick mentioned, the Commission adopted proposals that would facilitate voice service providers' blocking of robocalls that are highly likely to be illegal robocalls, including those with caller ID of numbers that cannot exist or for numbers not yet assigned. Now, you'll hear more about this later today, but I want to mention it because it's an important step in the Commission's work protecting consumers from illegal robocalls. And that work was in part a response to the efforts of the industry's robocall strike force. That group asked the Commission to help clear regulatory uncertainty so industry can better stop illegal robocalls before they can reach consumers. You'll hear more about that later on as well, but I want to mention that the strike force gave us an update on its work back in April, and we're excited about their work and what it means for consumers. And we continue to receive requests for clarification from parties seeking other regulatory certainty. One recent example is for a technology sometimes called ringless voicemail. In essence, it deposits voicemails for consumers without ringing their phone. The petitioner has asked the Commission to clarify that this type of technology is not subject to the TCPA's consent requirements. As we do with all these requests, we've sought comment with reply comments being due on June 2nd. Finally, I do want to note that we do actually do things other than robocalls on my side of CGB. In March, the Bureau granted an emergency temporary waiver to Jewish community centers to help them and law enforcement better respond to threatening phone calls. The waiver allowed JCCs and the carriers that serve them to access caller ID information on those calls, even when the caller has asked to mask that information. At the same time the Bureau granted that waiver, it also sought comment on whether to make the waiver permanent, and we're reviewing that record now. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for your hard work. I know it's still early in your term yet, but I know you've hit the ground running, and we really appreciate it. I also wanted to specifically thank Scott Marshall for all his hard work organizing things from the FCC's perspective. Scott, thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Karen Peltstrauss, and it's nice to see all of you again. As you know, I oversee the disability end of CGB. So I'm going to bring you up to date on what we've done since we last met, and then tell you about some upcoming items. First, in March 23rd, 2017, the Commission released a report and order on video relay services. The order contains a number of proposed improvements, trials, pilots. I'll give you a couple of examples. We've authorized a trial of something called skills-based routing. For those of you who are not familiar with video relay service, it's a service that enables people who use sign language to communicate with other people through operators who sign what a deaf person says, or who actually rather speaks what a deaf person signs to them to a hearing person and then signs back to the deaf person. So it's basically an interpreter called a communications assistant. Right now, the way calls are handled, they're first come, first serve. So you make a call, you connect with a video relay service, and the video relay service operator, whoever that communication assistant is, just connects your call. We have authorized something called a trial of skills-based interpreters, which will allow the use of interpreters who have specialized knowledge of medical, legal, and computer support terminology to have calls routed specifically to them to facilitate the communication that takes place over these calls. We also are authorizing a trial of what's called deaf interpreters. Deaf interpreters work with hearing interpreters to facilitate communication for people that have lower or minimal language skills. So you would have actually two interpreters, and a person maybe with cognitive disabilities or physical disabilities or lower language skills will then communicate with the deaf interpreter, who will then communicate with the hearing interpreter. We also approved a pilot of something called at-home VRS call handling. Right now, all calls for VRS are handled at call centers. This actually authorizes at-home workstations that are very secure and private. We have put into place a number of safeguards to make sure that confidentiality and call quality is maintained. This is something that's new. We're trying it out given the emphasis on telework in our society, and we're going to give it a go for 1 year beginning November. The other two trials start in August. We're going to determine, based on various reports that we receive from providers for both trials and pilots, whether or not to continue these programs. The VRS item also announced that we will start publishing summaries of how fast each provider answers calls. That's called their speed of answer. We're trying to make this information public to allow consumers to have an easier time selecting amongst their providers based on quality and speed of service. And we have amended our rules to allow hearing people to get what's called VRS numbers. VRS is a closed system. up until now, only deaf people were able to get telephone numbers within the system. The benefit of a telephone number is that you don't have to use an IP address to call somebody, so you can just use a regular 10-digit number and reach a person who is using VRS. But only deaf people were entitled to these numbers. So if you got, for example, a call from a VRS user and you wanted to call that person back, you could do so dialing a 10-digit number. You didn't need their IP address. Again, the calls are taking place over broadband. This actually allows people who are hearing, who sign, to be able to get such numbers so that they could sign directly to people who are VRS users, kind of like Skype, FaceTime, etc. But it's within the VRS system, and a lot of people use equipment that's specially designed for the VRS system. So this allows a lot more direct communication between hearing people. For example, I signed, but I couldn't get a number before, and now I'll be able to get a number, and I could sign to deaf friends and colleagues. The VRS order also adopted a notice of inquiry on performance goals and service quality metrics. What we're trying to do is determine metrics that will achieve the congressional goals, such as functional equivalency through accuracy of interpretation, voice and video quality, interoperability, etc. And we ask a lot of questions about what these metrics and performance goals should be. Finally, it adopted a further notice on the compensation methodology and rates for VRS, as well as a number of other issues, including whether to set aside some money each year from the Relay Fund for research and development, which we've done so far. Next, we are engaged in making final decisions on the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program. This is a program also called ICANN Connect, wherein we provide up to $10 million annually from the Relay Fund to support local programs that distribute communications equipment to low-income people who are both deaf and blind. I know for those of you who have been here before, I've mentioned this a number of times. Since 2012, we've operated the NDB-EDP, which you learn to say very easily when you work in this area, but the ICANN Connect program, as a pilot program, it has helped, I think, about 4,000 deafblind people so far. In the past, we certified one entity per state or territory to operate this program. The program is transitioning to a permanent program, no longer a pilot, as of July 1st, and we are now looking anew at the entities that should be certified in each of the states and territories. There are now 56 entities or territories and states, one in each state, plus D.C., Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and Northern Mariana Islands. And we have been we received from around February 7th to April 7th applications from entities, and just this last week, May 12th, we released a public notice announcing certification of the first 13 entities. We're doing this on a rolling basis. So we're going to continue releasing notices announcing the entities that are getting certification. Next, we have one of the committees that is parallel to yours, the Disability Advisory Committee, has been renewed for a second term. It held its first meeting on March 21st, and the next meeting is June 16th, so we invite you all to that. We are continuing our efforts to try to promote something called direct video calling. I can't remember whether I mentioned this to you before, but this is an effort which is slightly different than relay services, which promotes the use and placement of people who are deaf or hard of hearing who sign in customer service centers, so that people who sign who are deaf can communicate directly with those individuals. So, for example, Verizon or Microsoft, both of them actually have this at present, have deaf individuals in their customer service centers, and a person who signs can call directly over broadband and communicate with that individual without having to go through a relay. It makes a lot of sense in today's day and times to have those individuals placed there. The calls are more private, they're more accurate, they're faster. So now just for some things that are coming up. On Monday, in honor of Older Americans Month, On May 22nd from 1 to 2 o'clock EDT. We will be hosting a webinar focused on a range of telecommunications and video programming issues related to older Americans. The event is free and registration is not required. It will be streamed live on our website, www.fcc.gov/live, with open captions, and it will provide information and tips about the value of broadband connectivity, dealing with robocalls, our favorite topic, reporting suspicious calls to the FCC's Consumer Complaints Center, and a host of disability access matters, including rules governing hearing aid compatibility, closed captioning, emergency access, and relay services. Next, in June, we will be recognizing outstanding private and public sector ventures that advance accessibility for people with disabilities in our annual awards ceremony for the Chairman's Awards for Advancement in Accessibility. Those will be, the ceremony will be held on June 13th at 4:45 at the M Enabling Summit at the Renaissance Hotel in Arlington, Virginia. The chairman will be also giving the keynote at that event. And I can say that we have some phenomenal winners this year. We received nominations between February and April and innovations that were introduced to the public all last year, 2016. Finally, I just want to mention 2 video programming requirements that are about to go into effect. These are pursuant to rules that were adopted in the past. The first one has to do with multi-video programming distributors, or MVPDs. In response to rules adopted in 2015, as of July 10th, 2017, these distributors will have to pass through audio information about emergencies when they are provided on linear programming accessed on second screen devices such as tablets, smartphones, laptops, and similar devices. When the programming is sent over the MVPD's network as part of their MVPD services. And the purpose of this, that's a lot of legal jargon. The bottom line is that emergency information shown over these second screens via linear programming has to be accessible to people who are blind and visually impaired, and it has to be done through audio. So we already had requirements. This is pursuant to the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. We already had requirements in place requiring such emergency programming on television to be accessible. This expanded to second screens. Linear programming on second screens, again, goes into effect July 10th. Another deadline, and the last thing that I will talk about, is that clips of video programming shown live or near live, and near live is basically your late night shows that are pre-taped only a few hours before they're shown live. When they're shown on television, if clips of those live or near live programs are then shown via internet protocol, they are going to have captions as of July 1st of this year. So that's all I have. Thank you very much. And it's great to see all of you again. Are you going to open for questions? Oh, okay, I didn't see that. Sure.
So Commissioner Clyburn has come into the room, and I'd like to invite her to come up and say hello if she has a couple minutes. And then we'll do questions if you guys can stick around for a few minutes after that. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Well, hello. That will be the most compliant I am all day. It is so great. Number one, I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to spend as much time with all of you as I would like. But I just wanted to once again thank you. Just to listen to the end of the report from Karen just is a reminder, and it underscores just how important your role is and how much that we benefit from hearing all of your points of view. Because if there's any one thing, regardless of what happens, behind us, once a month, or regardless of how much we might posture or differ, the one thing we can agree on is that communities, particularly communities where the market forces may not address all of their needs, that you are our eyes and ears, on the ground, making sure that we answer the call. So I always thank you, but I cannot thank you enough. The American public will not be able to thank you enough for, again, being our conscience. Because that's what you are. You're our conscience. And it will take everybody at this table and so on and so on. I'm remembering this commercial. I think it was a Pantene commercial. And so on and so on and so on. So not all, I don't have good hair, but I've got good intentions. And if we, continue with that and so on and so on and so on, and knowing that, even though you're representatives, that, we need to ensure that the circle is always widened in terms of the players, in terms of the responsibilities we have, in terms of, what you need to, remind us of as policymakers. Then, each time we come or each time you assemble, you will have yet another positive nugget or policy a positive policy story to be able to share. So in the 2 minutes that I have left before I'm supposed to be getting into a car, no, it's nothing personal, but I am going to eat lunch today because I didn't do it yesterday. Yeah, I don't know if you have any questions or concerns. One of the things you're going to talk about, and I was really hoping to be at the end, it's always missed. I know Montgomery County always is going to raise her hand. But before I turn over to look at her, what I'll just do. I'd like to pick on her, but I'm not going to be able to hear about something that's gotten a lot of news coverage and, of course, takes up a lot of our time. And you're going to take that up, I believe, before lunch when it comes to unwanted calls. I got a call. I'm trying to prep for the meeting, and I see my cousin who doesn't call often. She calls, so I'm like, is this being taped? Anyway, so she's calling. I'm like, I said, but no, this is my cousin. She doesn't usually call, so I pick up the phone. Well, I called her back. And I said, is anything wrong? She lives in Charleston, not far from my house, so I'm scared. Is anything wrong? She said, I clearly get about 8 to 10 calls a day on my landline. I'm like, Lord. I write down the numbers. I do all. What can I do? I can't take it. This is too much. And I've gotten savvy. I know what not to say, how to respond, all these other things. But I'm on the do not call list. I'm on this. I did everything I know to do. Now I'm taking down numbers. I said, fabulous that you're taking down numbers. I would love for you to take yet another step and be among the hundreds of thousands, that have, reached out to the FCC and complained. But you've gone a step further by writing down, numbers that are repetitive and then like, look, we need to do everything we can for me not to have to talk to my cousin so frequently, as much as I love her. And so, it's important. It affects all of us. And I'm chuckling today because literally I'm trying to prep for that meeting. And she said, I can't take this anymore. I'm like, neither can I. So thank you for what you do. We're going to be innovative, all hands on, strike force and everybody else, working to see what relief we can bring. It will never be enough, but the efforts will always be worth it. Yes, ma'am. The gentle lady from Montgomery County.
Thank you, ma'am. I just want to follow up on the idea of being the conscience. I felt you have been the conscience on the commission through several chairmen. And I'd like to know, we were just having a conversation this morning, and a lot of us were talking about there was a lot of hard work that went into efforts, things like lifeline reform, and there's a sense of these things being rolled back. There's a sense that there's a lot of conversation about how we can help industry and not much conversation about how we're helping consumers in underserved areas. Right. Do you have some thoughts of how can we be, as the CAC, an effective conscience?
we need to continue to make the business case for everything we do. And what I mean by that, I appreciate you bringing up Lifeline. Lifeline for those who are economically stressed could be the conduit for so many of the technological and other benefits that our that communities need. We need to do a better job maybe working with healthcare professionals, particularly those who work with the underserved and those who have again economic challenges, to see whether or not there are devices, concepts, software, zero rating packages to get politically charged. We've shown yesterday that we don't have a problem taking certain stances, right? That we can build perpetually better models. So I think we need to expand as be Pantene models. Expand our reach with the how do I want to describe them? With those who provide the services that could be better delivered through a more connected model, through a phone that doesn't have de minimis service, through a device that might have, some type of software or sponsored data complement that would be. So I think we need to do a better job going to the healthcare providers, the other agencies that provide, goods and services and the like, and to try to make the business case from the outside in. I think that will help us come to better conclusions and kind of shift the narrative, so to speak. We need to do a better job showing the benefits. We know it, we can see it, but I don't think we do a great job connecting the dots with the goods and services, with the end user goods and services. I think we can do a better job, and I commit to being a partner on that. Did you have another part to that question? Because again, I didn't eat breakfast either, so I'm kind of rough here.
I would be remiss if I did not thank you that when you were acting chairman, the only woman chairman of the FCC, you went and approved the prison calling reform, which I think is not only being the conscience, but actually putting actions, not just talking about it, but taking action. And I think that what you outlined about the business case and talking about that the importance of connecting people to their communities was more important, and that's a good lesson for us to kind of keep in mind in those things.
Thank you so much. You're going to make it hard for me to pick on you today after that. But I really want to thank you, and it takes partners like you talking about this, talking about some of the challenges, with I use your county as an example in so many ways in terms of, how we need to make sure that, this agency and others, when we talk about 5G and other, small cells and like that, we do not disadvantage you, that we don't make your jobs harder, that we provide you with the tools and maybe sometime with the place to talk about some of these issues, that if we can be a sort of a neutral party when things get a little tough, speaking with some of the representatives at the table and others, that we work things out as opposed to again getting a little political again, maybe the nuclear option in terms of preemption. I think there's a lot of real estate that we can, to travel along before we go to what I would call the FCC nuclear option when it comes to that. And I really hope that we can talk more about how we can empower cities and how we can gain a better understanding, with providers to provision those services that people need, to make their lives better. Any other questions before I'm being? You're being very generous. Thank you. Well, I'll always be here, except when I'm hungry. And but sincerely, thank you all for what you do. You know how to contact me, and anything I can do to make your lives easier, to really do more to ensure that the American public, particularly those who are might be more vulnerable. There are more than 50 million people who we have identified, and that number is growing as we get more mature, that we have identified that might have, advanced or special needs that will require more by way of, technological assistance. They could benefit more. 50 million people, that's significant. And I think, again, with your continued support, we can answer the call of them, of inmates, of cities, and of all of you. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Mark.
Does anybody have any questions for Karen? Mark.
Thank you. Mark Reichert, American Foundation for the Blind. I want to congratulate the Commission on doing next Monday's webinar. It's very important to be reaching out to the aging community. Wanted to mention for this group that the American Foundation for the Blind, over the last really about a year or so, has been launching something called the 21st Century Agenda on Aging and Vision Loss. There may be folks in this room, either directly or through your networks, who may be interested in at least knowing about what we're doing there and participating perhaps in that. If you were to visit afb.org/aging, you'll find out about that. So wanted to mention that, but wanted to congratulate the Commission on doing this webinar next Monday. Karen, I had a question for you about it. It seems like the focus of the webinar is on communications. Not will it also extend to anything touching video programming?
Yeah. Hi, Mark. Thanks for your question. It is going to touch on video programming as well. It will, for the disability segment, the individual that's going to be presenting from the Disability Rights Office will touch on accessibility tools for video programming.
Okay, great. We went through the litany of things that were going to be on the agenda of closed captioning, emergency information, et cetera, and I would encourage the Commission to be sure to emphasize the value of video description. This will be a tremendous opportunity to get the word out about something that our community in blindness and low vision has, I think we've done what we can, and we're going to do more, but it would be a great opportunity, and I hope the Commission will emphasize that next Monday.
We'll make sure that we do that.
Mitzi?
Hi, I had a question. In looking at the robocall NPRM that was released, the Commission basically, those I've read it, is basically suggesting, along the lines you specified, that there were certain types of calls that because they're spoofed or they're not registered, that are likely to be fake. Mm-hmm. The question I have is, it looks like this would be a voluntary effort that providers could do, and you're essentially creating some safe harbors for them so that if they do it, they won't have legal issues with it. The question I have for you is, if it's voluntary, is the FCC going to report and make available to consumers which providers are doing it?
So I'm not sure that we asked those questions, whether we should do that in the notice. So that's something certainly we could consider. Certainly if folks made the point in the record, I don't think, though, necessarily we teed that up squarely. And we'd certainly hope that providers with, if there's legal cover provided by any ensuing order that would say it's okay, it's not a problem to not complete these calls when the calls are highly probable to be illegal, go ahead and block those calls. We would certainly, as part of that, encourage that happening. As far as how there would be accountability or the FCC, sort of making public who does that and who does not is not something I think that's squarely teed up. So.
Can I ask the second one is, in there you noted that there were 10,000 victims that the IRS reported of tax scams. If people had it was a robocall or some kind of fake call that was used to do that, for those victims, do they report those that it came over the phone to the IRS? Do they provide it to the FTC? Do they provide it to the FCC?
So we always think when there's an illegal robocall, consumers are more than welcome and should file complaints with us. The IRS is also very interested in that as well. The FTC, I think, generally tends to focus more on sort of deceptive marketing practices and things like that, but the FTC is always a resource as well. So we are, and I know that you all are interested in this, we are certainly working on enhancing our current robocalls outreach and guidance, including addressing questions like that. Where should a consumer come in the specific case with a specific question? So we are working on that. It's a great question.
Anybody on the line? All right. Thank you guys for joining.
Thanks.
Next up, we have an update on the incentive auctions and what happens next with Charlie Mike, who is the Senior Advisor for Communications and Policy on the Incentive Auctions Task Force.
Thanks all of you all for having me back, and I wanted to say thanks to Mark and Karen, who just left the room, for making sure there was a buffer between myself and Commissioner Clyburn, who probably had better one-liners in 2 minutes than I will have in the next 15. So let me just make sure I can. All right, how about that? So I was here, I think, in the January meeting, and we had just hit the final stage rule of the auction, so we knew some results, but not all of the results. And later that afternoon, we released our plan for figuring out the post-auction transition schedule. So what I can do today is tell you the rest of the results of the auction in case you missed the several days of press that ensued back in April. Give you a little bit more of a window into the post-auction transition, which I think is the area where we would all agree, certainly the task force agrees that this group can be most helpful in helping us get the word out on what consumers can expect over the next 3 years. Tell you a little bit about, or an update on what we're doing for consumer education. I give you a little bit of a preview of our plans back in January. We've started to put that into motion. And then because this came up in the questions back in January, I wanted to give a quick update on what we're doing for low-power TV and translator stations. So starting with the auction results, sort of generally, these are some things you heard when I was here in January. The auction repurposed 84 megahertz of spectrum from the UHF TV band for mobile broadband use. 70 megahertz of that was licensed for licensed use that was auctioned, and then the other 14 for unlicensed use and wireless microphones. We brought in $19.8 billion in gross revenues in the forward auction. That translated to about, I think, 19.3 after credits for small business and rural bidders. A little over $10 billion went to winning broadcasters, which, as you've heard now, the broadcasters couldn't talk about this when I was here in January, but since then, a number have come out and talked about specifically what they're going to do with that money, including some are reinvesting it in their facilities or in programming or starting, other types of projects related to localism and news gathering. Interesting stuff happening there. And of course, $7.3 billion to the Treasury for deficit reduction. That number was around $6 billion when I was here in January, but there was more bidding to be done. So this is where we've ended up to this point. The remainder of that money is, I think most of which is the $1.75 billion that will go to reimbursing broadcasters who are still on the air who've been reassigned to new channels. On the reverse side of the auction in particular, this is the broadcaster portion of the auction, there were 175 winning stations. Of those, 145 were successfully bid to go off air, but that doesn't mean what you think it means. The off-air option essentially meant that the bidder was willing to relinquish their current license solely in exchange for some level of a cash payout, or monetary payout. As opposed to the next category I'm going to talk about in a second. Of those 145, though, 92% of them have expressed an interest in sharing a channel with another station in their market. They've stated the intent to channel share. They have the option to do so. Some have already negotiated and filed agreements with the commission saying that they're going to share with a particular station in the market. And there are several months for these stations to continue negotiations if they haven't actually reached an agreement already. So we'll know more in the coming months about how many of those 133 stations actually effectuate a channel sharing agreement. The other 30 winners were band-changing winners. In other words, those stations bid to relinquish their current license in exchange for less of a monetary payout and a new license to operate on a different channel lower in the TV band, somewhere in the VHF band. And the thing that really jumped out of the results, at least from our perspective, is you had winning stations sort of covering any category you can think of. You had commercial stations and non-commercial stations, stations owned by large station owner groups and independent stations. You had them in big markets and small markets, rural markets. And very interesting to me, anyway, was the fact that the amount of the winnings really varied. You had 9-figure winners, and the largest of which brought in an individual station that brought in over $300 million. You had several stations that won with six-figure winnings. So how these stations really defined the economic opportunity that was available to them in this auction, it was a choice they made on their own, and it varied. There was no cookie-cutter way of looking at that. On the forward auction, speaking of diversity, we had 50 different winning bidders for the licenses. As you probably read, the two largest winners, both in terms of the number of licenses won and the amount of money they bid, were T-Mobile and Dish. And we have now the licensing process for these new licenses is underway. Just yesterday, I wouldn't blame you if you missed this, given all the other news yesterday, but the first batch of applications that have been accepted for filing in this process, we put out a public notice on that, which means that we've completed the initial review. The applications were complete, and we can now begin the public process of reviewing those licenses. And the public can petition if there are concerns in that process. Speaking of processes underway, so now we are officially, as of the middle of April, when we close the auction, we are in the post-auction transition process. What does that mean? This is the process by which we along with the broadcast industry are going to work to clear this new 600 megahertz wireless band by reassigning stations to new channels, and then they do the construction and other engineering required to effectuate those changes. You see on the screen here, there are a little over 1,000 stations who don't need to do anything. They can remain on their current channel. Which leaves 987 stations who have been reassigned. 30 of those are the band-changing winning bidders from the auction that I mentioned earlier. They've bid to move to a new channel. They will pay for those moves using part of their monetary winnings from the auction. The image on the screen here is an example of the engineering and physics challenge that the Commission faced in trying to determine the order and the schedule of this transition. Moving 987 stations at the same time would be an immense coordination effort and leaves a lot of room for Murphy's Law, I guess. So what we did was we put together a plan that tries to make sure that we can break up this. What we're looking at here is this massive daisy chain of stations that can't move unless the other moves, which can't move unless the next guy moves, and so on and so forth. And as I mentioned before, when I was here in January, we had just put out the final adopted plan for determining that order and schedule. What we put out along with the closing PN in this auction is the actual schedule. And what it does is it breaks all of the 987 stations into 10 phases that will, they've all begun, and over the next 39, or I guess now 38 months, stations will be, as I mentioned before, doing the construction and engineering required to effectuate a channel move. The key date, I think, in terms of consumer outreach, or one of the key dates, actually all 10 of these are key dates, but the first one is Phase 1 ends on November 30th, 2018. Okay, so we've got about a year and a half before we get to that point. However, there may be some consumer rescanning required before we get to the end of phase one. Why is that? We have the winners, stations who have agreed to go off air and actually intend to do so. We know at least that's the 12 stations who didn't indicate they want a channel share, but they want an off-air bid. And then the channel sharers themselves, who, when they actually effectuate those agreements or consummate those agreements, then they will move on to someone else's facility and share a channel. And so in that market, they will have to let their viewers know that they're moving. Which is why we have started putting into motion some of the outreach efforts and the education efforts that I described back in January. We see our role in this process is complementary to the. I think Chairman Pai put it really well at the NAB show. You made the case that, look, if you're trying to get a message out that's important in a local community, there's no better way to do that than their local broadcast stations. And obviously, the stations themselves have an incentive to make sure their viewers know where to find them when they move. So our view is we have a supporting role to play. One of the ways we can do that is to leverage the fact that consumers actually do rely on us for information on how to access over-the-air television and things like that, and what stations they have available to them. So I'm going to get into that a little bit in a second here. We want to make sure that the consumers and households that are the hardest to reach, I'm thinking traditionally this is seniors, this is Americans with disabilities, this is households where English may not be the first language spoken. How do we get into those homes and make sure that they're receiving the message here? And then, the groups represented here and other national partners that we work with, who have an interest in making sure folks get the message. How can we work with you and support you in those efforts? So, a few of the things that I was talking about in January are already in place. As I said, the two main ways that consumers interact with us is through our consumer call center and on our website. And so right now on the consumer webpage, there's a section dedicated to post-auction Q&A. How will I find out where my stations have moved? What do I need to do if I'm a cable or satellite customer? Do I need to do anything? Questions like that. This Q&A is also the basis for if we do get calls from consumers in the call center. To my knowledge, we have not yet, but as the news starts to spread that this is happening and happening soon, we expect that we will. What's on the web today is in both English and Spanish, and we're working on other languages as well. And we also have a printable version of this a downloadable version that our partner organizations can use in packets, or if there's an opportunity to distribute this electronically, we'll work with that. I also mentioned back in January that we have we're working on a PSA-style video showing folks how to rescan their TVs and their tuners to make sure they're getting reflecting any changes in the over-the-air lineup. That is now live. It's available. The URL on the screen, www.fcc.gov/rescan. You can view or download the video. We are trying to figure out. We're working with the broadcast industry right now to figure out how to best make this available to stations should they want to use it to spread the word. Two of our most popular consumer guides downloaded from the CGB website. One is what kind of over-the-air antenna do I need? And we've updated that as well as the what I'll call the paper version, the analog version of the PSA that I just described about rescanning. These are two of our most popular, and we've updated them to reflect what consumers may need to know now that the incentive auction is over and the repack is upon us, particularly to the extent that there are markets that were maybe UHF only before, but now they've got some stations who moved to VHF. you may need a dual band antenna, and so you need to make sure you have one. Similarly, we've got these consumer tip cards. We've got one on the rescanning. I think we've got one in the works on the antenna purchasing. This is great. I actually brought these we were at the NAB show in April, and we brought these out there. We will have them available for other events if we can find a way to distribute them. But it's an asset we have that we can deploy. This is really more related to the post-auction transition itself, but it has the potential to pay some dividends on the consumer education side. The Media Bureau announced that we were going to assign regional coordinators to 10 geographic regions so that so during the repack itself, we can gather information that may be useful for, let's say we find something in phase 1 for a station in Georgia that they're experiencing that may also be useful information in phase 5 in that same market. Or if we find a particular issue with supply chain in a region or something like that, we can share information and try to address that at the commission level as quickly as possible. But the other thing it allows us to do is it gives us someone who's listening to what's happening in different regions that may impact consumers. And having that early warning system built into our transition process helps us share information, whether it's internally or perhaps in working with groups represented here and others to make sure that we're working in unison with the best information. So what else do we have coming out? Right now, and I think this is going to be an iterative process and a list that grows, but we're working on we have a consumer guide that directly addresses unlicensed wireless microphones. Now these are in the new wireless microphone rule regime that has come out of the changes from the auction. There are, if your organization has fewer than 50 mics in use, then you'd qualify for the unlicensed. And so that we've heard from everything from churches to community theaters to high school sports and the like, local TV that just using unlicensed. They want to know what do we need to do? How do we make sure we're interfacing with the white space databases and understanding what our obligations are. So we're working, CGB and the Office of Engineering and Technology are working on that now, and that should be ready fairly soon. I mentioned before that there are going to be markets where stations may be moving or going off air before November of 2018, and so we're gathering the data on that now. It'll be informed a little bit by some processes that will go on this summer where the reassigned stations can come to the commission and ask for some modification to the assignment, the facility that we've assigned them. So once we know for sure where everyone's going to end up, then we can start to do a little bit of advanced work in these markets. In addition to our consumer tips being some of the most popular downloads on the CGB site, it's our most popular social media content as well. And so we're working on a plan now to build a campaign around social media for the consumer tips I've just described, as well as finding one other way to give a heads up as a phase deadline or other key deadlines are coming up. And last but not least, getting the national partner outreach moving. I'm here with you today, and I hope I'll be back to give you further updates. But I'm also meeting giving a briefing for the Disability Advisory Committee next month, as well as the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, and I will speak to anyone who will listen. So. Which brings me to point 2. We have a list of national meetings coming up over the next few years, and we're working on a plan for doing whatever will be useful in that context. And same with the point 3 here, which is what can we do and how can we help at the chapter level, local level, getting the word out. Quickly, as promised, on LPTV. So I think the question I got last time, do we know the impact on LPTV generally speaking, and specifically on how that might impact diversity, viewpoint diversity in the media landscape? The answer remains not quite yet, because as I mentioned last time, we won't actually know for sure which stations would be displaced until we get through the process I just described a moment ago, where throughout the summer we'll have one last chance to see where all the other auction and reimbursement eligible stations end up. We've given them our assignments. They have two opportunities to come in requesting changes. Once we get through that process, we'll have a solid database of what the remaining available channels will be on a very, very geographic specific basis. And we just outlined for the LPTV and translator industry through a recent PN what they can, the timeline and the procedures for them coming into us once that database is solid, to come to us and make requests. What happens if two stations or more request the same thing that would be in conflict? What other steps can they take to mitigate the impacts, including minor engineering modifications that they can make to to stay to avoid interfering with other stations. So I think more on that to come. All of the information that I just described and a plethora of other things available on the web, fcc.gov/incentive auctions, plural. Here you'll find everything from the schedule for the repack and the transition, all of the commissions and the commission level and bureau level decisions related to the auction and the transition, the consumer page, auction results, transition data files for broadcasters. Pretty much anything you can think of, I hope, is on there. Take a look. If you find something missing or something you'd like to see, call or email me. Now I realize my phone number is not on there, but email works just fine. So, speaking of questions, I can take some if you have.
Anyone have questions? Zainab?
Did you call on something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hi, thank you. So you mentioned that the consumer information will be shared in English and Spanish, and that you're working on other languages at the moment. Will that include American Sign Language?
Excellent question. If it's okay, I would like to get back to you because I don't have the list, but I think that's important.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I do want to make sure that that information, which is very valuable, is accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Thank you.
Certainly, I should add, anything that's on the website obviously would be in compliance with 508, so at least in that context, it would be available, but I think I'll check for more.
Hi. This is Ken Mackel, and I guess a follow-up question to that is, I would think of the important to look at the stations that may be going off the air or sharing channels and finding what languages they broadcast in, and then making sure that the information is provided in those languages.
That's a great point, and at least on the station side, so our rules for the transition require that the stations give 30 days notice. I'm trying to visualize that section of the PN because I'm fairly certain we say that it's got to be in the language that they broadcast in, but let me look into that and I'll see if we need to address that. That's a great point. Thank you.
Mitzi?
Mitzi Herrera from Montgomery County. Just quickly, as part of the auction process, planning, implementation, was there any analysis done by the commission in terms of if the providers were not paying above cost of running the auction? So you have cost to run the auction, and then there's the additional money will be funding that goes into the Treasury. If the providers were only paying the cost to run the auction, is there any analysis of what percentage that investment in purchasing the spectrum represents as part of their whole operations, or how much potentially that could free up for funding to put into deployment into underserved areas?
Well, I think that the way the auction was structured, I mean, this might help answer the question. I maybe through a side door. The way the auction was set up is that the licenses that the forward auction bidders were bidding on was sort of disaggregated from the stations that were purchased in the reverse auction to clear that spectrum. Does that make sense? So you may have a market that was cleared without us having to purchase any stations in that market, but then we sold licenses that would sort of overlay that. So there was not really a one-to-one relationship between money spent in a particular market for the wireless auction and reverse auction winnings that would help to clear that market, if that makes sense. It may not make sense, but
what I'm trying to get at is the commission has teed up several questions in which they're looking at is preempting and limiting compensation for right-of-way poles to cost. Mm-hmm. So what I'm asking is, in the equivalent, in the commission case of the spectrum, what is the cost if you limited the spectrum similarly to just compensation? Is there any evidence that the commission had that said that either that would free up X number of dollars that telecom companies could use for investment, or similarly showing that what they're paying for the auction is only a minor percentage of what their overall investment operating costs are?
I know of no such analysis, but again, I think that the auction structure goes at it from a different way.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
And we look forward to staying in the loop on this.
I will. It saves time for me anytime you'd like, and I'll come down.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it, Charlie.
You bet.
Next, we're going to be joined by Linda Vanderloop. She's the Assistant Vice President of External Affairs at AT&T, and you may remember her from the January meeting. She's going to give us an update on the strike force and its progress since January.
Is this working? Yep. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here to talk about one of my favorite topics. And I know that probably sounds kind of strange, but it really is, because when I got involved in the strike force, I worked with people. There were 30-plus companies and organizations, and a lot of them, historically, we were on the opposite side of every issue. And this was such a great example of people working together and teamwork and making progress, and everybody was in it 100%. So, in fact, we had people begging to join the strike force. So the Industry Robocall Strike Force brought together key members of the ecosystem who have the ability to make a contribution in combating the robocall problem. And so working together, and we really were, most of us were really focusing internally in our companies about how do we solve the problem. But working together, we were able to develop a much more robust set of mitigation tools than we would have been separately and working alone. And so this is a good example of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And so the strike force really kick-started the process, but there's a whole lot more to do. And AT&T is very, very active, an active participant, along with the other members of the strike force. But the process is changing a little bit. AT&T is no longer leading the strike force. several associations and standards bodies who are much better organized to continue the work that the strike force identified in the initial report. Have taken over the leadership of the process, and Kevin and Krista are two of the leaders in that ongoing process. So over the past 6 months, ACT, the App Association, ADIS, CTIA, U.S. Telecom have continued the work that was identified in the October 26th report, and it was still in the focus areas of authentication, empowering consumer choice, the detection, assessment, traceback, and mitigation area, and the regulatory support. Each organization met regularly with their members over the past 6 months, and it's really important to note that for the purposes of the addressing the robocall problem, these groups expanded the membership beyond the association or the standards body membership, because we know we really need we need the whole ecosystem involved to really come up with a solution. So, for example, the Traceback group is made up of not only the U.S. Telecom members, but wireless, CTIA members, and wholesale members, and people who really need to work together to identify the problem and come up with the mitigation tools. And then, in addition to meeting with their individual groups, ACT, ADIS, U.S. Telecom, and CTIA all met together for planning and coordination purposes to make sure nothing fell through the cracks, and to make sure that we're all coming up with the comprehensive solution that's needed. So just a few things. And there was a report published April 28th of this year, with a lot more detail on what the strike force has done and will be doing. But a few examples in the area of the authentication, ADIS formally published the Shaken framework, which is the framework for the caller ID authentication. They also partnered with Newstar to offer a test bed to members and non-members as well, so that this framework could be tested. And this will be available until the end of 2017. And so as of the April report, 10 companies have already executed the agreements that are needed, or are in the process of executing those agreements, and others have also executed non-disclosure agreements. So the testing is going to go on, and towards the end of the year there'll be more information on that. For empowering consumer choice, ACT launched a public-facing website with relevant information for app developers, and to encourage them to develop robocall-related apps. And they also developed and held a workshop for the app developers. CTIA and U.S. Telecom have both brought subject matter experts to educate the members on on what's available today. And then several of the members have already introduced their own robocall mitigation tools. So AT&T introduced Call Protect, T-Mobile launched Scam ID, and both of them are free and network-based to identify and stop potentially illegal calls. On the detection and, assessment, detection, traceback, and mitigation, additional do not originate trials have taken place, and as you might remember from the original report, there was a do not originate trial on the IRS numbers, and we worked with IRS and stopped a significant number of the IRS scam calls. So other trials have been executed and have been proven effective. Also, the Traceback Group has either doubled or almost doubled the number of members. How many are we at?
21.
Okay, so we've got one to go to meet the commitment that was made in the original robocall strike force report. On regulatory support, the FCC has been extremely supportive, and as Mark had talked about earlier, they issued the NPRM and NOI to support the industry so that carriers can block the calls. Now, some calls, we made an announcement to answer one of the questions earlier. We made an announcement a few months ago that using existing tools, using our big data analysis to try and identify robocall campaigns and some contracts that we have with wholesale providers, we were able to block 1 billion robocalls in about 6 months. And so we're continuing that process, but we're limited. We can only block certain calls from certain carriers because of the agreement. So this NPRM and NOI is going to help tremendously, not just the whole industry. And I don't think there's going to be any hesitation for most companies, particularly those involved in the Traceback Group as well as the Strike Force. I don't think they're going to hesitate when they have the ability to, and the safe harbor, to block the calls. It's going to happen. And so the work has not stopped. We're all committed to continuing the work until the robocalls stop. And so I also want to thank you for the work you're doing, because consumer education, getting the word out, making the tools available to customers is important. I think, we're all in this together, and we need everybody's help in getting these types of calls stopped. So I wanted to leave lots of time for questions, even though I'm way over anyway.
Susan?
Hi, Susan Grant, Consumer Federation. I know you don't know the answer to this yet because I just asked you about it yesterday, but I do want to flag that one of the concerns about this ringless voicemail technology that delivers pre-recorded messages directly to cell phone voicemail boxes is whether the tools that you're providing to thwart robocalls will be effective with this new technology. So be very interested to hear what you find out about that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, we'll have to understand more, how those calls are routed and how what the technology is.
Jonathan?
Thanks, Ed. Linda, thank you. John Schwantes, Consumers Union, and I know you've worked very closely with my colleague Maureen Mahoney, and I appreciate your work. You said the work will continue. Do you know if you will report back in, say, 6 months again?
We don't have any plans for a formal report in 6 months, but I think everybody plans to make sure that the work that we're doing is communicated. I mean, I think you've seen a lot more, company statements and public, announcements of some of the things that we're doing, and we're all definitely open to talk to people when they're interested. I try and, those that I know are interested, I try and give them regular updates to the extent possible. But as far as a formal report, there's no plans at this time.
Do you have any questions from the phone?
No, just this is Ken Mackler again from Consumer Action. I just really applaud the work that the carriers are doing in terms of taking the lead on this. I think it's been very effective so far.
Thank you.
Mitzi.
Yeah, I guess I would pose the same question that I posed to Mark. Is it going to be voluntary, and is there a way to create a sort of simple mechanism for consumers to know which of these carriers have voluntarily agreed to do what?
It's a good question that we can look at. As far as I'm pretty sure it's not going to be necessary because people are going to be bragging about it, to the extent possible. We've also got to be careful about giving too much information to the bad guys. So, we don't want them to know necessarily, oh, okay, so AT&T is blocking and there's a couple other companies that are blocking. So we're going to try and route our traffic over company X that isn't blocking. So it's we've got to be careful on how we give that or what information we give out.
I mean, I just would say from an educated consumer and choice perspective, I mean, Commissioner Clyburn I didn't want to say to her, I think that's a big reason why people have dropped their landline calls is you just get so many more robocalls on your landline than you do on your mobile device. But it seems like if you want to give consumers a tool that says, what can you do about this, then you want to have a carrier who has voluntarily adopted the tools that we think will be helpful. If everybody does it, that's great. But if there are, because it seems to be that nobody wants to have a requirement to do it, so it's going to be voluntary. It just seems like that's a really good consumer empowerment tool in addition to sign up for the do not call, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure your carrier.
Yeah, I agree. But on the other hand, we just have to balance it with giving the bad guys, because they're really smart. And we're already seeing signs of them saying, oh, I know that person's blocking these kinds of calls. We're going to go around it. So, some of the things, too, is, in addition to that, carriers can also be very vocal about the tools that they're giving their customers, too. So that would be some other good information as far as, I can talk about us but other companies have other tools that they're providing their customers. Like we've got the Call Protect. I know you will continue to see more and more announcements from other companies who either have expanded the types of customer call control type tools over before the end of the year. I know you'll see some more announcements.
Rick?
Rick Elrod from Fairfax County, Virginia. It seems to me those two rationales are contradictory. If we're saying it's not necessary to publicize what companies are making methods available because everyone will brag about them and know about them, and at the same time we can't make it public because the bad guys will know who's doing it. Well, you can't have both those things at once. It seems to me it would make sense to have basic information available. This company gives you a method, something like that, without going into the technical details of the method that could be used against it.
Yeah, and I did. That's what I was trying to say. I didn't do a very good job of it, but thank you.
Any other questions? Mark?
Mark Reichert, American Foundation for the Blind. I've never been shy about revealing how much I don't know in questions, so this will probably be one of those moments. Are there tools right now that essentially allow a consumer to receive calls only from those origins that they identify in advance, well in advance? So effectively being able to say, look, I'm only going to receive calls from the stuff that's in my contacts, for example. Something along those lines. If there is already something, I'd love to hear about it. If not, clearly you want to make some exceptions to that. You wouldn't want someone to either intentionally or inadvertently block emergency calls, for example. But I wonder if you could address that. Thanks.
There are tools available for. I don't think you can limit to just 5 or 6 numbers. And I don't think we have the capability, there's any tools yet to just be able to pick up the calls in the, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin or Krista, just to be able to pick up the calls from the contact list. But there are tools that, things like I mentioned, the Call Protect, which there's blacklists that show that calls that have been identified as extremely likely fraud or just blocked. Others are marked as potential spam. And then I think Kevin has some other tools that.
Is this on? No. You're good. You're good. Okay. I was just going to add that there are tools. The generic term for it is a whitelist, and many providers offer that whitelist service. And the way that service basically works is the consumer can select whatever the limit is, 10, 15, 20 numbers that they want to receive. And through that whitelist service, those are the only calls that consumer will receive that are listed on the whitelist service. And that can be a useful tool, but it's, the key here, I think, is to emphasize that there are a lot of different tools that do different things, and, we want to empower consumers to select the tools that make the most sense for them. And the FCC has a lot of those tools listed on its website.
Okay. I think we're going to take our lunch break now. We are a little behind schedule, so I'm going to ask that we do. Right. Right. We're going to do about a 10-minute lunch break. There was a blip on the broadcasting of the video feed, but once it's into the archive and the FCC and available on the website, it will be fixed in there in full. So please plan to return to the table by 12:35. Feel free to have your lunch with you. Just a reminder, the lunches provided are for committee members and staff working the room. Alternates and others in the room are welcome to grab a lunch after those people have gotten theirs. And thank you again to CCA for providing us with lunch today. Thank you, everyone, for taking a timely break. Our next speaker coming up is James Brown. He is with the Consumer Data Office he is the Consumer Data Officer for the CGB, and he's going to be updating us on the complaint data and the CHC. James is joining us by phone, and I believe he has a PowerPoint presentation as well.
I do. Thanks, Ed. Can you just let me know when the PowerPoint's up, and then I'll start from there.
Are they putting it up remotely?
They should be doing it from the commission meeting room.
Okay, so we have... Great. So you can get going, and Brittany's going to help advance the slides for you.
Perfect. Thank you. So the FCC launched the Consumer Help Center in the fall of 2014. The Consumer Help Center is made up of 3 areas. 1, educational materials. 2, filing consumer complaints. And 3, consumer complaint data. So today I'm going to focus on filing consumer complaints and consumer complaint data. Some of the parts about filing consumer complaints might be a repeat for some, but we think it's important to go over again. So consumers can file complaints anytime on any device. The website to file a complaint is consumercomplaints.fcc.gov. So what you're seeing right now is the way that we've organized the consumer complaint website. Complaints are organized in a way that allow consumers to select from 6 product areas. The product areas are TV, phone, internet, emergencies, and access for people with disabilities. We also added a place where consumers can tell us their story. So the Tell Us Your Story area was rolled out in the fall of 2016, and it was developed to allow consumers that don't have an actual complaint but would like to share their story involving issues around telecommunication services to do so. So what we found before is some consumers were submitting what they would deem as a complaint, but it was really just they were just voicing their opinion about something. And so the share your story is supposed to kind of help out along those lines. So in the case of Tell Us Your Story, consumers can select from the right side of the website and describe their story. In this case, consumers won't hear back from the FCC, but the FCC could use the information to help inform decisions and policies going forward. However, in most cases, consumers are still filing an actual complaint, so I'm going to go back to the left side of the screen. A consumer complaint can be filed for a variety of issues, including things like billing, service quality, unwanted calls, and more.
James?
Yes?
If we could interrupt. Could you let us know when you need the slides advanced?
Yes, I'll do that, yes. So you're still on the first slide. You're good.
Okay, great.
Yep. So to file a consumer complaint, the consumer would select from one of the 6 product areas, like phone or TV, and then select an issue that best represents their complaint. Next slide, please. So now you should be at the second slide. So in this example, you're looking at a phone form where the issue selected is billing. Every form is set up exactly the same way, where an issue is selected, and based on the issue, certain questions are populated. So then once the form is completed and submitted, we send out an email in real time that acknowledges the FCC's receipt of the complaint. Next slide, please. So now we're actually looking at an actual email after a complaint is submitted to the FCC. What's important here is every time we receive a complaint from a consumer, we acknowledge it in real time. We send out an email. If additional information needs to be provided by the consumer, they can respond directly to the email they received from us. And by responding to the email, the information that they sent in gets updated in real time. So we're always having kind of a real-time interaction with consumers as long as they're responding to the emails that we send back to them. Next slide, please. All right, so depending on the type of complaint submitted, a few different things can happen. So one, the FCC could email consumers with information like a consumer guide that helps explain specific issues. So I think in one of the prior demonstrations, someone had mentioned that one of the more popular consumer guides is still along the lines of tuning TV antennas or digital antennas. So sometimes we get complaints about consumer not being able to get a certain over-the-air channel or something like that. So this would be an example where we would probably send back a consumer guide letting them know how they could retune a tuner or how they could get over the antenna or something like that. There's also instances where another state or federal agency is better suited to handle a complaint, such as the state PUC or the Federal Trade Commission. And so in those cases, we would email the consumer back letting them know what agency we think would be better suited for their specific issue. We also might use the information just to share among the FCC to help with FCC actions like unwanted calls. So in that case, we're not resolving individual complaints, but we use the information internally to help with FCC actions. In all of those instances, we're still interfacing directly with the consumer through emails letting them know what the status of their complaints are. And then finally, if a complaint involves a service provider and the issue described in the complaint is something the FCC feels the provider should address, then we do what we call serve the complaint on a provider. So this is more of an official process where a complaint gets served on the provider, and in that case, we just generate another email to the consumer letting them know what's going on. And then the providers have 30 days to respond directly to the consumer, as well as the FCC letting the parties know how the complaint was addressed. Next slide, please. So this graphic is actually just showing what I went over. It's basically how the FCC handles complaints. And the key here is that we have this graphic as well as some FAQs and other information on the top of consumercomplaints.fcc.gov. So at any time the consumer hits the FCC complaint site, how we handle the complaint, some frequently asked questions, and some other information is readily available for all consumers to look at. Next slide, please. So just to make sure we're on the same spot, we should be looking at the Consumer Data Center now. So when we launched the Consumer Help Center in the fall of 2014, we started to release some data about about complaints weekly in the form of spreadsheets as well as some charts and graphs. So we did that for the first 18 months or so, and then about a year ago, we launched what we're calling the Consumer Complaint Data Center. So with this launch, we started to use a product called Socrata. So it's SOCRATA, and it's a commercial product, and we use it to release consumer complaint data daily. So the data that we're releasing daily includes a complete list of complaints along with certain fields for each complaint. We also provide a specific data set that is specific for unwanted calls. So the unwanted calls data set we know is currently being used by companies that provide blocking technology to consumers. And then we can tell that these companies are actually using our publicly available API to access this data, sometimes, every few minutes, sometimes every hour, sometimes once a day. But the API itself is being used a lot by these companies to suck in the unwanted call data that we're providing. Next slide, please. So what you're looking at now is how the data is actually made available to the public. So it's available in a table view that allows anyone to filter and sort the columns. So I know it's small there, but anyone can access the data by going to fcc.gov/consumer help center data. And so if you're there, above each column, we have these three little lines. And so by clicking on the lines, you can filter and sort each column. And so by filtering it, some of them are actually, you can filter by word. So like if you want to filter like on the state of the complaint, then you could just select Maryland or Virginia or DC, and it would just filter the complaints in real time. You can also just kind of sort ascending and descending. We also provide more advanced analysis of the data by using additional filters. So on the top right, there's this blue button called Filters, and once you're inside the data set, that allows you to just do more refined searches. Each of the analysis that you do, you can actually save yourself. So if you went in here and you wanted to kind of search for complaints across an area defined by a specific form and a date range, those searches can be saved, and there's a unique URL that you could use to re-access those searches each time. The data also can be downloaded in about 10 different formats, including common formats that allow you to get the data inside spreadsheets. Next slide, please. So we also provide some canned visuals, so some charts and graphs at a high level, like the number of phone complaints over time. These visuals also get updated daily, and you're also able to create your own visuals once you access the data sets. And next slide, please. So to conclude, consumers can file a complaint 24/7. We also have a consumer support line that is available Monday through Friday where we can help answer consumer questions. And then more recently, we launched the Consumer Complaint Data Center about a year ago with data that's updated daily. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Great. Do we have any questions from anyone in the room? Susan?
I actually have a bunch of questions, but I'll try not to dominate this. I was recently looking in the database for information about whether older people had, how many older people had reported a particular problem, and I couldn't see anything about age, so I looked at the complaint form itself and noticed that there's no request for age or date of birth, or year of birth, rather.
Sorry, you broke up at the end. I heard the part about searching for age, and then there was some static.
Option for providing either your age or your year of birth. Is that something that the FCC has considered, and if it decided not to do that, is there a particular reason why?
So I don't know that there was any particular reason why. It's currently not collected. It's something that we could take into consideration. But you're correct. Currently on the forms, that's not a question that we ask.
I wouldn't want to make it a requirement, obviously, but as an option, that information could be really useful. I was asked a question actually by a Senate committee, and I was looking for documentation, and you have really good information, but you didn't have that. So
okay. Thank you. It's good feedback.
Okay, great. On the information that consumers are given about complaint submission and notification. It says if you've submitted a complaint about a telecommunications billing or service issue, your complaint is being processed and so on, by a particular division. But it doesn't say if your complaint's about something else, who is it handled by? And I don't know how many complaints there are about other issues, but is there some general information that is provided that I missed somewhere about where other kinds of complaints are handled?
No, there's currently not something that specifically describes where other complaints would be handled.
Okay. Are there consumers who complain about other issues?
They complain about other issues, and all the complaints are handled. We just haven't specifically said where they're handled. But consumers would get information back for every complaint that they file, kind of letting them know what's happening with that complaint. So, like I said before, it could be that same day or next day or within a couple of days, we send back a consumer guide that says we think this might handle your complaint. In some cases, we do let them know that based on the type of complaint they file, that it's something that we wouldn't individually handle, or we're not going to serve on a provider, but that we use the information for trends and patterns and other actions the FCC could take.
Okay.
And then, besides unwanted calls, our biggest complaint category would be billing issues, and most of those are served on providers. So the consumers would get that acknowledgement that their complaints were served on providers.
I just didn't know what the point was of telling them this if it doesn't apply to their complaint and it doesn't tell them where those complaints go. I guess, since people are hearing back directly, that's probably the most important thing. But I just don't know how useful this bullet is.
No,
does
it's good feedback as well. We can also, we can look at the content. I think that's been up there since the beginning of our launch, so it might be time to just relook at what we're saying as well.
And do telecommunications complaints include complaints about internet service providers?
Yes, they do.
I realize this is a contentious subject, but while they still do, I'm not sure that a consumer would understand that.
Would understand, yes, okay.
And then I think the FCC has generally done a really good job in using plain language, but, and this is nitpicking now, but looking at reviewing your complaint, not all complaints are actionable or constitute a rule violation. That could be made a little bit more plain language. And I think those were all of my...
So as a non-attorney, I would agree with you.
I think those are all of my questions. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, this is Ken McElhenney from Consumer Action. You may have answered this in the past, but what are the options for consumers for whom English is not the primary language?
So right now, the option would be to call our hotline, the consumer hotline, and then we would take their complaint over the phone for them. We are currently looking at offering the complaint forms in other languages, but right now it would be call, and then we would help you over the phone.
Is the consumer guide available in languages other than English?
Yes. So I don't work directly with the consumer guides, but I believe all consumer guides are available in Spanish, and then there's other languages being considered as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Olivia?
Hi, it's Olivia Wine, National Consumer Law Center. I notice on slide 2, it's mandatory for consumers to enter their name, the company name, on the form. And I was wondering if it's possible in these searches to also provide the company name.
Okay, so currently we don't release the company name in the public data that we're releasing.
Is there a reason for that? Other agencies do, like CFPB, you can search by company. So there
so I think it's something that's been considered, and I think it's still being considered, but I don't have an answer of the specifics of why or when it could be released.
Thank you.
Mitzi.
Just, I have a question, but just to follow on Olivia's, in the past when we had conversations, there was specific things that came up where if you have AT&T as your carrier, but you're calling to complain about an unwanted call, the company you're complaining about is not AT&T, your carrier. It is the unknown company. And I don't think they resolved that. And in some ways, I think that having the company name there may be a little bit misleading. I'm not quite sure how to, but it's not getting it. I'm not complaining about that company. So there should be,
Sure.
if they could be some other option for like third party, unknown third
Sure,
party
so-
might be.
So I think in this case, so company name is required, but only for certain issues. So in that slide 2, I was showing where billing was selected. So if you're complaining about a phone issue, your phone and a billing issue, then we ask for the company name. But if you're actually complaining about an unwanted call, which is a separate issue, then we don't ask for the company name. So it's not like someone would say, I have AT&T and I'm complaining about an unwanted call from, X company.
Okay, so my question was, and you probably weren't here to listen in, and Commissioner Clyburn came in this morning. So in addition to Pie's mom, we have Clyburn's cousin as our real world. So what she said was her cousin had a lot of unwanted calls, and she kept logs of these phone numbers, and Commissioner Clyburn specifically asked her to please file these complaints with the FCC. So the first question I have is on slide 6, on slide 8, and I'm not sure if this is an entry form or this is how you report them. Are unwanted calls part of phone issues or telemarketing issues?
Sure. So what you're looking at in slide 8 is the complaint data itself. This is how we release it. So what you're looking at here is just charts and graphs that are canned. And so phone issues would encapsulate every issue that we collect on a phone form. So that would include unwanted calls, and then telemarketing issues just carves out those that are specific to telemarketing.
Okay,
But
so what I'm trying
go on.
to, so you do go to pick the phone. Okay, so the real question I'm trying to ask is, if Commissioner Clyburn's cousin wants to know how many people in my area or my state complain or have similar calls, or what percentage of the calls coming in about telephone issues are unwanted calls, is there a way to pull that data out of the publicly available data? And if it's not part of the public, is there a way for consumer groups or these attorneys who are really trying to help get at some of this stuff to get to that data?
Sure. So I'm going to jump to if you guys can go back to slide 2 just for a second. So every complaint that's filed is submitted on what we call a form. And so if you're going to report an unwanted call, it's reported on a form called phone, and then there's an issue called unwanted calls. All right, so every unwanted call, the consumer would select unwanted call as their issue and then fill out the complaints form. So then jumping ahead to slide 8, what you would be looking at here, obviously if you could click on it, is the phone issues would be a pie chart, and it would show you for all of the complaints filed on a phone form, what percentage of each issue makes up that pie. So for unwanted calls, it would probably be about 50%, or actually probably a higher number of the phone complaints that we get involve unwanted calls.
Okay, so is that data, can you sort that by date so that you could show like a trend in that? Or can you do any geographic
you could.
sorts?
Jumping back to if you go to slide 7, so that's just showing a table view. And so we have 2 data sets. One is a complete data set of all complaints, and that would include unwanted calls rolled into that data set. And then we have a separate data set that just shows unwanted call data. Both act the same way, where we show the date the ticket was created, which is the date the complaint was filed, the date of the issue itself. So for unwanted calls, we ask the consumers to tell us the date they got the call, so that's there. The state and the zip code that the consumer is complaining from, as well as the number that they received that the unwanted call came in from. And so all of that data is available in a table view, and then that can be sorted and filtered and rolled up by state, zip code, time, and so forth.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Yes.
James, just to clarify
Yes.
on that last point that you made, that currently, though, there's no way to graphically pull the data based on a set date range. So, for example, you couldn't show that in the last quarter maybe there was a dip in robocalls because of the strike force efforts around blocking IRS numbers or something like that in the publicly available sort of pie charts and outputs that are available on the website right now.
No, I mean, we would have to create more, we would either create more graphics ourselves or individual users could do that by just kind of some advanced, like the advanced filtering tools. But currently, when you, going back to slide 8, if you were to click on like one of those graphs, it's just showing you basically the entire pie over time.
Since the database, since this started in October of
2014.
Right.
But it's something that we could definitely, consider, and we've talked about this before, which I mean we could do stock charts of quarters or years or months, and then in addition, individuals could come and do that themselves as well. So if they weren't interested in quarters, but they wanted to do it over a 6-month trend or something like that, they're able to do that as well.
Olivia?
Hi, Olivia Wine, National Consumer Law Center. So this is going back to the scenario of a consumer motivated enough to keep a little diary of time of call, the number that shows up on the caller ID. So looking at the complaint form on page 2, if I were to click on unwanted calls, is there a way for me, without having to fill out a form for each particular call, to just sort of batch load so I could put in phone number and time for each incident? So it's just, I sit down once, I'm angry, I'm going to do it just once, but, if I have to fill out 10 forms because I got 10 of these calls today, that adds to the pain of the robocall.
Sure. So it's a good question. So I should also say, so in October of 2016, the unwanted call form itself, the number of questions were reduced by 75%. So it used to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 questions that could potentially be filled out, and now it's about 20. So still realize it's 20, but we did reduce the amount. But currently, you would still have to fill out a complaint for each individual call. So if you receive 10 calls throughout the day, it would be 10 separate complaints. But we've heard this issue, and it's something that we're considering basically along those lines. So if you're getting 10 calls, come up with a better, consumer-friendly way for consumers to say, I received 10 calls without submitting 10 forms.
Well, James, I would encourage you to stay tuned, and if our afternoon recommendation passes, we should follow up and discuss some complaint entry ideas that we have about streamlining that process.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. It was a great presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, keeping with our robocall theme of the day, we have Jerusha Burnett joining us. She's an attorney advisor for the Consumer Policy Division in CGB, and she's going to be providing us with an overview of the March 2017 robocall blocking, NPRM, and NOI. Yep.
Explainer-in-chief of order. Just getting the right slideshow up here. Nope, I'm good. All right, so yes, as was just said, my name is Jerusha Burnett. I'm an attorney in the Consumer Policy Division, and I've been asked to talk to you about the recent, March NPRM and NOI on robocall blocking. So as many of you, or perhaps all of you are aware, one of the major impetuses for this NPRM and NOI was a request from the robocall strike force. And the strike force in their initial report specifically asked the commission to amend the call completion rules to make clear that voice service providers could block certain robocalls without violating their call completion obligations. So we thought that was a great suggestion and took it up, and this is part of one of the results. So first up, there are two parts to this. There's a notice of proposed rulemaking and a notice of inquiry, and they look into slightly different issues. The notice of proposed rulemaking, to start with, proposes rules that would allow provider-initiated blocking of certain calls without including those blocked calls in call completion rates. Now, it proposes a few main things. First, the codification of a PN that the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau released in September of 2016. Second, to allow voice service providers to block calls originating from certain categories of unassigned numbers. And then it also asks a few questions about special treatment for internationally originating calls, in case there are situations where those need to be treated differently by providers. It finally also seeks comment on the current definition of illegal robocall, just to make sure that we have a definition that's both fully inclusive but not wrapping in things that shouldn't be there. So first up is the codification of this Consumer and Government Affairs public notice. Now, this public notice made it clear that providers can block calls where the owner of the number purportedly originating the call asked for those calls to be blocked. So this is the IRS do not originate request situation. So the IRS has a hotline. Some fraudulent actors will spoof that hotline number to get people to answer the phone and to trick them into believing it's actually the IRS calling them. But the IRS never makes calls from that number. So the IRS can, the CGBPN clarified the IRS can go to voice service providers and say, look, I never originate calls from this number. Please block any calls claiming to be from this number. And it does this on the grounds that no reasonable consumer would want to receive a call that is almost certainly illegal. This section also asks about sharing of information on these requests. So to make sure that a consumer doesn't have to go, or the IRS or whoever doesn't have to go to every individual provider to get that number blocked, but instead can submit one or a couple requests and the information can be shared across the industry. Now, there are certainly efforts already to do this, and we were very clear that we don't want to stall or interrupt those efforts in any way. We want to find out what we can do to help them. So second is unassigned numbers. Now, this would allow blocking of calls, or expressly allow blocking of calls, where the number is one of a list of categories of unassigned numbers. So first and probably simplest is invalid numbers. These are numbers such as ones where they use an N11 code like 911 in place of an area code, or a number that uses an area code that simply does not exist at all. So we ask about allowing to block those calls. We also ask about allowing to block calls that originate from numbers that are valid but not yet allocated to a voice service provider. We pay some special attention to how much information the voice service providers have and how up-to-date that information is as to whether a number has been allocated, because we do not want to sweep in calls that are being that have already been allocated to a number that's been allocated and now assigned to a subscriber. We don't want that subscriber's calls to get blocked. Similarly, we ask about calls purporting to originate from numbers that have been allocated to a voice service provider but are not currently assigned to a subscriber. And so this is similar to the allocated but unallocated, but a little bit different in that we want to make sure that we know how much information both the provider to whom the number is allocated and the provider to whom the number is not allocated has, because it may be that the provider to whom the number is allocated will have significantly more up-to-date and valid information, and so there might be further limitations that need to be placed if the number is allocated to a different provider. So that's the basics of the NPRM. Now, there's also a notice of inquiry, which seeks information that goes a bit further than what the NPRM proposes to allow somewhat broader blocking based on what objective criteria. So the unassigned number is sort of the quintessential objective criteria, right? You know this number is not assigned to a subscriber. You know no one is actually originating a call from this number, so it's probably spoofed. Now, spoofing isn't by definition illegal, but you at least have some level of information there. This is more about other objective criteria that might be useful. It also inquires about creating a safe harbor for blocking calls based on these objective criteria, and asks some specific questions on how to protect legitimate callers from being blocked. So first up, what kind of objective criteria is this talking about? Well, it's talking about things such as soliciting and reviewing information from other carriers, performing historical and real-time call analytics, contacting the subscriber of the spoofed number, or the caller ID authentication standards that have been in progress. But it also asks for other methods, because it is entirely possible that people out there have some really great objective methods that the Commission simply isn't aware of. And so we definitely want as much information on those methods as we can. It asks and is very careful about how accurate these methods are, because, again, we don't want to block legitimate calls. And it looks at whether some methods might be more appropriate when the blocking is initiated by the consumer, because consumer-initiated blocking has been permitted previously, expressly permitted previously. Voice provider-initiated blocking is a little trickier because your consumer might have different levels that they're willing to accept on false positives, on the possibility of a call that they want to receive getting blocked. So if the consumer is choosing that blocking, that's fine, but we want to be very careful when the provider is choosing that blocking. So some methods might be great for consumer-initiated blocking, but a little risky for provider-initiated blocking. So what about these legitimate callers who might get blocked by these calls? Well, the NOI recognizes that this might occur. And for example, so let's take an example. Say you have a call center that is conducting a robocall campaign, but has legitimately received express consent, the right level of express consent from all the people it's calling. And so they're perfectly, they're operating within the law. They're allowed to make those calls. And in fact, some of the people they're calling may well very much want those calls. That's why robocalls are legal, right? But their call patterns might look very, very similar to a call center that is conducting a completely illegal campaign. So we want to be sure that those legal callers are not being blocked because some element of their call patterns comes across the same way. So a couple things that the NOI considers are a possibility of creating a whitelist of legitimate callers so their calls are never blocked based on the objective criteria. So, you can have these legitimate call centers say, look, I want to be added to this list, and they don't get blocked. We also look at how a legitimate caller might contact a voice service provider if they believe their calls are being wrongfully blocked. So the timeline for this, the NPRM and NOI was adopted in March, on March 23rd, and the summary was just published in the Federal Register this week on May 17th. So with that, comments will be due on July 3rd, with reply comments due on July 31st. And so that's the quick overview of this NPRM and NOI. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Margot Saunders, Olivia Wine's colleague from National Consumer Law Center. You said that you were looking into allowing certain robocallers that had consent, and so that those calls, which are legal calls, would not be blocked. How would you determine whether or not they actually had consent?
So the NOI, it's a notice of inquiry, so it's fairly early stages, and that's actually something we would love to have some comments on how to do that. In fact, we ask about how to create some sort of a whitelist or similar. So we haven't thought out a detailed structure yet. If it were an NPRM, we'd have a much more detailed structure. But for a notice of inquiry, it's because we feel like we need more information before going to the NPRM stage. So we'd love you to provide any comments on that you might have.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Anyone on the phone? Oh, Mitzi.
Mitzi Herrera from Montgomery County. Can I just ask the same question I asked of Mark? Would you consider, I guess, either on your own or if somebody's going to put it in the record, is whether these, if you look to see that these are good things, should companies either be required to do them, or should they be required to disclose whether or not they are doing them, so that consumers can understand if I want these protections, which providers are going to offer them?
So that is not squarely before the commission in this proceeding. But as with the legitimate caller question, I would certainly welcome that in the record. But it is not squarely before, and we have not clearly proposed rules. That said, if it was put in the record, again, part of this is an NOI. So it contemplates the possibility of moving forward to an NPRM on that section later. So even if it doesn't make it into the rules with the NPRM portion, it might be something that we could move forward with. But right now, it is not squarely before the commission.
Steve.
A totally selfish question here. Have you given any thought to maybe moving the deadline for comments back a few days so it doesn't fall in the middle of a 4-day weekend?
Unfortunately, the comment deadline is set was set when the NPRM was adopted and was also then established by the date of publication. So we were at the mercy of when the Federal Register actually published.
But you have authority to...
We have not discussed that, I'm afraid.
Any other questions? Oh, Stephanie.
Stephanie Fody from NCTA. Just one question: how do the items proposals differ from what the strike force recommended or proposed?
So the strike force's recommendation, I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but was basically about allowing blocking based on objective standards and amending the call completion rules to do so. So the major difference, I would say, is one, that we're starting out with just one subset of that in the NPRM, but also that there's a little more detail on things like protections for legitimate callers and things like that, as opposed to a sort of a general allowance of blocking. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does
Anita have a presentation?
No PowerPoint.
So next we're joined by Anita Day. She's the Assistant Bureau Chief with CGB, and she's going to talk to us about robocall outreach and the unwanted calls page.
Hi, everyone. It sounds like you've had quite a robocalls day already. I'll just keep it rolling then. It's good to be back with you. I had the pleasure of speaking with you in January about the same topic. And obviously, I can see that you have a lot of interest in robocalls, including the consumer outreach and education that we do. And of course, you've already been talking about the Strike Force report, so I'll touch on that as well in my overview of what we're doing. So as I had told you in January, we have been issuing robocall alerts, consumer alerts, and we issued alerts on gift cards, a utility scam, financial scams, and of course IRS scams. Since then, we issued another alert. On March 27th, we released an alert about the Can You Hear Me scam. And this is a scam, if you haven't heard of it, where callers are trying to get the victim to say the word yes during a call by saying something like, "Can you hear me?" And you say yes, it gets recorded, and then maybe the scammer is trying to use that recording to authorize, bank account authorizations or things like that. So when we issued that alert, it really struck a nerve with the public. Because, of course, we have our social media accounts. So I have a couple of numbers. We had 10,533 Facebook clicks on that announcement. We had 1,955 Twitter engagements. And we had, I also have the number of page views, because, of course, that alert went on our FCC.gov. We had 4,815 page views of that alert. And to put it in perspective, that is about 20 times more than the January financial scams alert that we put out. So that was a very big deal. Our alerts have some standard information in them. They, of course, explain the scam. They tell consumers where to report it, which is usually us, the Federal Trade Commission,
the gift card company, if such a card was involved, and the police. We also offer tips to help consumers protect themselves. Some of the tips will be specific to the scam. Some of the tips are more general. So I'm sure you all know all this already, but I figured it would be helpful to go through the general tips again. Of course, don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Let them go to voicemail. If you're unclear if a caller is legitimate, hang up. Look up the company's phone number independently on a recent bill or on their website and call them directly. And of course, if you're initiating the communication yourself, you can verify that the request is actually legitimate. If you answer and the caller, which can be a recording, of course, asks you to hit a button to stop getting the calls, just hang up. Because scammers will use these tricks to identify and then target live respondents. You can ask your service provider if a robocall blocking service is available. I have one, and it's been incredibly helpful. We also updated our Unwanted Calls Consumer Guide to reflect these and other tips, and directed people to our website on web resources for blocking calls. And if you're curious, you probably know this already, but it's www.fcc.gov/unwanted-calls. And that there's more information and resources on blocking, on robocall blocking tools. So when we are thinking about the next alert, we draw from a variety of sources, internal and external, to determine what scams are affecting consumers most. We also coordinate with other agencies, depending on the topic and the circumstance. For example, when we kicked off this project, I guess in November, we coordinated with the Federal Trade Commission. When we did the IRS scam in December, we collaborated with the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. And as I mentioned, thinking about future alerts, we're currently considering our next one, what it should be, and we'd love your ideas. If you want to tell us what topics you think would be of most interest, for example, what topics and scams should we think about for the next one and future ones? Are there other tips that we should be giving consumers to make sure they don't fall victim? And how can we best spread our alerts? Of course, we're interested in low-cost, high-impact distribution. Currently, our distribution, like I said, is social media. The consumer alert, I think our Office of Media Relations may send it out to its sources, but I'd have to confirm that. And then we send it out to the consumer groups that we know, and I think some of you may be on our mailing list. But if you have other ideas, of course, please do let us know. So a little bit more about the Unwanted Calls webpage. It's on fcc.gov, like I said. And on it, we highlight the work of the Industry Robocall Strike Force. But we also supplement that work with other relevant information. So the information includes resources from the Federal Trade Commission, the IRS, as well as the Do Not Call Registry, which, of course, we created with the FTC. We also give consumers general tips on understanding what a robocall is, when their consent is required, and some of the different requirements for robocalls to wireless and those to wireline phones. We really want to have fresh and meaningful content on our websites, so we really welcome your suggestions for new content. And you can contact Scott, of course, with comments. We can talk about it in the Q&A. Or you can make formal recommendations, whatever works for all of you. So just a couple more things about how we talk about robocalls in our day-to-day work. We had a robocall webinar on February 16th, where the entire hour was dedicated to the topic. We talked about the TCPA, how it's enforced, and technological solutions. And it's archived on our website. And I wrote down the URL, but it's really long to read out. So if anybody's interested, I can send it to you. Just let me know. And finally, this is Older Americans Month. And of course, we know that many older Americans are frequently targeted by scammers. So we're including robocalls as a topic for our monthly campaign, the campaign this month. So of course, we have a social media component, Facebook, being a popular tool for older Americans, and Twitter being a good tool for the younger folks who have older Americans in their lives. We're going to have a webinar, again, May 22nd, and one of the topics will be robocalls. We have a few other things on the agenda as well. And we've got teams going out to senior centers this month, handing out information. And they'll also be going to the DC Annual Senior Symposium, which happens to be in June, but we'll count it as a part of Older Americans Month. So that's what I have for you. I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Kevin?
Hi, Kevin Rupi with U.S. Telecom. Do you have any analytics, Anita, regarding how many visits you're getting to the FCC's unwanted calls page and specifically the tools section of the page, just out of curiosity?
I think we do. I know we have analytics for FCC.gov. I don't know how specific it gets. I'll have to go back to the people who actually do that and check with them, so I'll get back to you.
Margo?
Just a quick question. Does the FCC envision enforcement actions against robocallers if they can identify them?
So, since I'm part of the outreach team, I can't speak to the current thinking on the enforcement situation with robocalls. I'm sorry just to sidestep the question like that. So why don't I talk to the folks on our team and get back to you?
Thank you.
Anyone on the line have a question? Other questions? All right. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you so
Great to
much.
have you.
Thanks.
And we'll get that link for the archived webinar in February and make sure everybody gets it. And then we also can send the link for the webinar coming up on the 22nd so that you'll have both the archived one and the next one to take a look at. Next on the agenda, we have an introduction to the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, also known as the BDAC, and Brian Hurley, who is their designated federal officer from the Wireline Competition Bureau, is going to join us.
Good to see you. Hey, Brian. Hey, Scott. How are you?
There you go.
Go ahead and put this up here.
There you go.
Thanks for coming. Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be here. As Edward mentioned, my name is Brian Hurley. I am in the Wireline Competition Bureau here at the FCC, and I'm the designated federal officer for the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee. So I'm just here to give a little bit of an overview of the BDAC, as we call it, and kind of what we've done so far and where we're headed. So the BDAC is a federal advisory committee chartered under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, just like the CAC. We were officially established on March 1st of this year, so that means our charter runs through March 1st of 2019. And we can, of course, seek to renew it for an additional 2 years, as other committees have done. The BDAC's mission, in a nutshell, it's to make recommendations to the Commission on how to accelerate the deployment of high-speed Internet access, or broadband, by reducing or removing regulatory barriers to infrastructure investment. So the BDAC is really intended to be a means for stakeholders to share ideas and develop recommendations to the Commission on broadband deployment, which will in turn enhance the Commission's ability to discharge its statutory responsibilities to encourage broadband deployment to all Americans. So I'll just give you kind of a quick timeline of BDAC activity, what we've done so far, and kind of where we're headed during the calendar year of 2017. So on January 31st, we released a public notice soliciting nominations for the BDAC. We sought representatives from various sectors of the communications industry, state and local regulators, and consumer and community organizations. As you may have heard, we received quite the volume of interest. We received over 380 nominations. I think that was probably a bit more than most of us were anticipating. But it was a very encouraging sign, and there was certainly a wealth of great applicants to choose from. So on April 6th of this year, we announced the 29 members of the BDAC. The chair of the BDAC is Elizabeth Pierce. She's the CEO of a company called Quintillion. It's an Alaska-based company that deploys fiber optic cable to serve very remote, extremely remote communities in northern and western Alaska. And then our vice chair, her name is Kelly Cole, and she is the broadband outreach director for the state of Utah. In that April 6th public notice, we also announced 5 working groups that will be assisting the BDAC in carrying out its work, and I'll kind of go over those one by one briefly here in a moment. So the BDAC held its first in-person meeting here in this room on April 21st. The meeting was largely consisted of everyone kind of getting to know each other and staff making presentations to the BDAC just to kind of give them a sense of what was coming and kind of some of the context in which they would be doing their work. So the next step has been trying to set up the working groups for the BDAC and get those up and running. As I said, there are 5 working groups that we announced in the public notice. In subsequent public notices over the last week or two, we have actually announced the membership of 4 of the working groups, and so we're still putting together the 5th one. And then the next meeting of the BDAC is we're looking at July 20th, which is I think it's a Thursday. And really the purpose of that meeting will be for the working groups to sort of present with the work that they've done to date, and kind of it's an opportunity for the full committee to discuss and provide input on all of the product, and hopefully give the working group some ideas and some feedback that will help them as they go forward in continuing to develop their recommendations. And then we're looking at a end of the year meeting sometime in the October or November timeframe. And the purpose of that meeting would be to vote on final recommendations for at least for 2017. And as I'll explain the working groups, 2 of those, some of the deliverables we're hoping to get at that end of the year meeting are 2 model codes, one for state governments, one for municipal governments, both of which are intended to provide model provisions guidelines on how to accelerate broadband deployment. And I should mention the working groups. If you take a look, if you've seen any of the public notices we've released so far in those, the working groups will include both members of the BDAC, the 29 members, as well as some additional applicants who are not selected for the full BDAC. So it's an opportunity to bring in some additional voices to sort of further enrich the work. So I'll just briefly run through the working groups. The first 4 of these we've announced the members of, and they're in the process of getting to work and scheduling their first calls and doing all of that. So the first of the working groups, as I mentioned, is it's the Model Code for Municipalities working group. And actually the CAC's own Deborah Berlin is a member of that group, so thank you, Deborah, for agreeing to do double duty on the two groups. So the purpose of this group is fairly straightforward. It's to draft a model code for municipalities to accelerate broadband deployment. And we've suggested some areas they could look at, things like franchising, zoning, permitting, dig once. But we were really leaving it open to the group to decide kind of what the components, what elements should be included in this code as well as the state code. And for both codes, we've emphasized that it should be designed to meet the needs of a broad, diverse range of municipalities that differ in terms of their geography and population density, size, different background regulatory environments, and other factors. So that's one group. As I said, another group.
I'm sorry. Let me ask the question. This is Ken Macklin at Consumeration. Will that also look at the ability of municipalities to establish their own broadband?
It's really up to the group to determine sort of what the code, the components of the code will include. So we haven't gotten far enough to say exactly what the components will be and won't be.
Did you include anybody in there who is from a community that has launched their own program?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Your working group memberships are posted on the BDAC site?
They are, yeah, for the first 4 of the working groups, yes. And if they should be there. If they're not, you can't find them, just I can certainly track them down for you. So the second working group I mentioned is they're working on drafting a model code for state governments. Part of the role there will be to look at the roles of state regulatory agencies and other bodies, and sort of addressing things that states can do to promote more robust deployment at the municipal level. And again, we want it to be able to cover a diverse range of states. So the third group is called the Competitive Access to Broadband Infrastructure Group. A large focus of this group is on pole attachments, access to utility poles. And I should actually mention another member of the CAC, Ross Lieberman, is agreed to be a member of that group, so thank you as well. So this group will be developing recommendations on how to promote speedier, more efficient access to utility poles while ensuring the safety and the integrity of existing attachments. They also look at recommendations on promoting access to other infrastructure like ducts and conduits, rights of way. So that's sort of the focus of the group. So the fourth group is the Removing State and Local Regulatory Barriers group. And they're looking at identifying patterns of instances of actions that have been taken at the state and local level that could serve as barriers to broadband deployment, provide recommendations to the Commission on how to address those. And then there's a fifth group that we're still putting together the membership for, and that's this Streamlining Federal Siting group. They're focused on recommendations to improve the process of siting infrastructure on federal lands, also on federally managed properties. Looking at such things as recommending standard procedures for facility siting, recommendations on how to standardize the duration of leases and easements, and just other aspects of that. So that's a quick overview of kind of the BDAC and the working groups that we're in the process of putting together. One final thing I'll point out is we do have an open docket that we've set up, basically as a repository for if anyone wants to submit comments for the BDAC. It's docket 17/83. So that's anyone is free to file anything there that they think would be interesting or worthwhile for the BDAC. So that's overview.
Great. Any questions? Steve?
Can you talk a little bit about how, if at all, the relationship between the BDAC process and the rulemaking proceedings, where the Commission will be collecting comments and from about the same issues, but
no, it's a good question, and it's actually something we've thought about a little bit. I think to see the precisely how they interplay is something I think we'll have to see as both kind of processes develop. One thing we have done, though, is we put out a public notice right at the beginning of the BDAC process, clarifying that comments and any presentations and things that are made in the context of the BDAC, like at a BDAC meeting or in one of our working group calls, those are exempt from the ex parte rules that apply in those different rulemaking proceedings. So the idea there is that people can kind of, within the context of BDAC, people can communicate openly and freely on these issues. And if it's determined at a later point that there's something that's discussed in the BDAC that we think might be useful, to inform what we're doing in the rulemakings, then we'll make sure that information is put into the record and the docket for those rulemakings if it's going to be in any way the basis for a decision. So that's kind of how we've been dealing with it.
Mitzi.
Mitzi Herrera from Montgomery County, Maryland. The Commission has a long history of different rulemakings in which they have preempted municipalities and local governments in various areas so that they could promote deployment.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many states out there that have engaged in various schemes in which they have either created one-size-fits-all or preempted across the board. Is the FCC staff planning to provide any analysis to look at where you've had those experiments? Have these types of restricting, preempting local governments as a way of reducing barriers, has it actually led to more deployment compared to areas that have stronger regulatory regimes?
I mean, so I'd say in the context of the BDAC, I mean, it's the BDAC that's doing the work of developing.
But you've selected all the people on the BDAC.
We have, that's true.
Right. So, I mean, you have other cases, and we've had lots of conversations in various iterations of this group about data-driven analysis and whether these rules have actually had impact. So you have a good decade plus from cable franchising to various states to preempting local governments to preempting municipal broadband. You have lots of examples of where you've done that. So is it useful to provide to the BDAC some empirical analysis? You collect all kinds of data about fiber deployment, copper line deployment. You've got lots of those reports, and you've got statistical analysis departments.
I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, we're working with the BDAC and the different working groups to see kind of what information is useful to them. But they're really kind of operating independently in terms of deciding what information to gather and how to analyze it and everything. So.
Anybody on the phone line? Rick?
Rick Elrod, Fairfax County. To follow up on Missy's question, will the BDAC conduct a cost-benefit analysis before issuing any recommendations?
I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but it's really up to the BDAC to kind of determine what recommendations to make and sort of what analysis will underpin or underlie the recommendations.
Well, let me ask then a question about the structure of the BDAC. As you know, the majority of the BDAC members are from industry seeking preemption. The chairman of each working group is from the industries. What specific procedures and methods are you putting in place to ensure that the local governments who actually make these rules and are familiar with how they're made that their input is fully heard and taken into account?
I mean,
what specific procedures are you putting into place?
I mean, we've included members from governments on the various working groups, and so those who are on the members of the groups have the full opportunity to advocate for their views, and we've been working with the chairs of the different groups to make sure that the meetings are being done and conducted in a way that everyone is having the full opportunity to have their say.
And to the extent that we have issues of overlap, I would hope that Scott and you can help us find the pathways to the right people so that our members could have discussions, if that makes sense, with the corresponding members of BDAC working groups or other ways to communicate.
Absolutely.
And have you and Scott talked about forming sort of like a happy hour support group for DFOs?
I'm all for that.
Yeah, Scott, well, let's talk.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good.
Thanks, Brian.
So next up, we have consideration of a recommendation.
Wow.
So the robocall working group, which Kevin and I co-chair, have put forth a recommendation that was distributed in advance as part of the meeting packets to everyone. There were 2 changes that I emailed around to the group this morning. Those are being considered friendly amendments by the working group. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody got those, had a chance to read those. On top of the folder at each seat was a clean, updated version of the recommendation that incorporates those changes that were sent out and highlighted earlier. Does anyone have any questions about the... we can move the recommendation. Yeah, let's. Do I get a motion to?
Motion to move.
Yes. Debbie moves. Can I get a second?
Second. Okay.
Now, on the amendments, are there any questions or comments? Does anybody want them read out?
They're short.
Okay. Any further discussion?
About the amendments or about the whole thing?
About the whole thing. Krista.
I just want to thank you, Ed, and Kevin for this recommendation. I think all the back and forth you had and the openness with all the groups really made this a good first recommendation for the CAC. So thanks again for your leadership.
Thank you. Debbie.
I want to second that, just to say that this is a really good, comprehensive recommendation for us. So thank you, Ed and Kevin.
Mark.
Mark Reichert, American Foundation for the Blind. I'll third it, but I do have a general question. In item number 4, it talks specifically references accessible formats. I have no problem with this language, and I'm not proposing any language changes. I assume that we're all going to nod our head in agreement that we're also talking here about the accessibility of any online delivery of the complaint forms, et cetera. It's not just talking about hard materials.
That was the understanding, yes.
And with that, thanks so much. Really appreciate the emphasis on allowing folks with disabilities to have, be an active part in this process. Much appreciated.
Can we call for the question?
Can I?
Mitzi.
Sorry.
Question.
I was trying to read faster, and I was just thinking of the thing that somebody mentioned today was, and I'm looking for the right spot in here. If you have 10, if you are Clyburn's cousin and you have 10 numbers that you collected, is that number 7 is?
Would allow multiple unwanted calls to be reported.
Okay.
Requires a minimum amount of info.
Great. Okay.
Multiple unwanted calls.
Okay, yes, she just mentioned that, so I'm looking at that, yes. Okay, so that's great. I think that was really helpful because when he said you had to do 20 more questions for each one, that was good. And then the other one is on number 9, where it says about the app for mobile devices. So what I've noticed within my colleagues is and I don't think CEA is not on this group anymore, right? No. Okay, so the issue is that for different mobile phones, the ability when you get a call in to say, I want to block that number, some do, other ones you have to save it as a contact and then you block it. So I'm just wondering if there's any ability. It's I think it's in this app section, but it's either that or they should work with the device manufacturers themselves to make it easier for the consumer in some kind of one touch to block that number. And then I don't know if that makes it easier if you have the app to sort of say, great, these are the numbers I've just blocked, please report them. But is there a way to make a friendly amendment to that?
I would say that I think that the scope of the recommendation was more focused on complaints than the ability to block, and to the extent that this sort of app, perhaps created by the Commission itself in collaboration with providers and device manufacturers, would facilitate complaining as opposed to just blocking. We do plan to tee up other things along those lines in future recommendations, but this was focused specifically on facilitating complaint and driving complaint data.
And Mitzi, I would just, you're right, different platforms do things different ways, but on CTIA's webpage dealing with robocalls, we have videos for each of the platforms, showing consumers how to block calls on the individual platforms for iOS and BlackBerry and Android and Windows. So I would direct folks to that, or point consumers to that webpage if they're getting confused. There's step-by-step instructions.
Okay, so I just will draw the friendly amendment and just say that in a future recommendation, I think that these other strategies that really help consumers block the calls and having the FCC, I don't know how they feel about linking to CTI.
They do now on their unwanted pages.
Okay, well, that's great. So yeah, I just think maybe an additional follow-up recommendation is something that's focused on the strategies to help consumers on blocking this would be useful.
Sure. Zainab?
Hi, this is Zainab speaking. So I have a comment and a question. First of all, the comment is thank you so much for all of your hard work on this and for making sure that you've checked in with us members, specifically members with disabilities, and how this would apply to us. That's something that we've definitely needed. And then that brings me to my question. And the question is about how we can relate number 4 and number 9 to each other. Number 4 talks about the accessibility of educational resources and the complaint form. And then number 9 talks about the app. And I understand that that app is a way to file a complaint, but that doesn't make any mention of accessibility. So number 9 doesn't talk about accessibility of the app. So my question is about that, how those relate to each other.
My understanding is, and if anybody in the group interpreted this differently during the creation process, please chime in. But number 4 was speaking to the existing complaint formats and forms that are already out there. So the web portal and other paths of entry, whether it's the telephone system that CHC uses and things like that. The development of the app would be a new additional way to input complaints. Having said that, though, there's no reason why that app should not be accessible, and I would hope and think that anything that the FCC creates and puts out there for public use and consumption would meet accessibility requirements and formats.
Okay, thank you. And I agree. The concern is that it has been an afterthought. And so then there's a lot of time lost in that process. And so there's no harm in making this as clear as possible from the get-go.
Is there a proposed change or language?
Yeah, to add that the development of the app include all accessibility considerations, et cetera, et cetera.
Can you just, is it possible after mobile devices, you could say something like, so can be used by consumers with mobile devices, either including consumers with disability or including devices that have accessibility features, one of those to insert right in there?
This is Zainab speaking. That doesn't really work for me because that is actually quite limited. It's limited to the accessibility of the device, but we want to think about the accessibility of the app itself.
But the app is only used on the device.
Just put the word accessible before app.
Mark, did you have?
Yeah, that would work, putting the word accessible before the word app.
Following up on your, Mitzi, your comment, so right after that, essentially saying can or should, whatever the appropriate lingo is we're doing here, be accessible to and usable by people with disabilities.
Yeah, you could just add at the end, the app should be accessible and usable by people with disabilities.
Accessible to and usable by.
Yeah.
This is Zainab speaking. Yes, I agree with that.
So just read that. Can you just read that whole sentence then? Anybody have that?
Accessible to and usable by
people with disabilities. The app should be accessible to.
After app or after?
I think it's a new sentence at the end.
New sentence.
A new sentence?
Yeah, let's do that.
So develop an app that can be used by consumers with mobile devices to quickly file complaints for unwanted calls received on their device, period.
And that is accessible to and usable by.
And that is.
But if you just make a separate sentence, it might be more, you're kind of cramming a lot into a single. sentence.
The app
The app should be accessible to and usable by people with disabilities.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's good.
Anybody else need that reread out?
No.
So do we have a motion to accept the amendment? All in favor of accepting the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none. We ready to call the question?
Yep.
Do we need a motion to call the question? Good. Somebody want to move to call the question?
So moved.
Thank you, Kevin. Ken, second?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none. And it passes. Thank you, everyone. Next up, we have some reports from the working group.
Sorry, can I just ask as a follow-up on this particular one, since we've had almost an entire day devoted to robocalls, can we ask that the commission at the next two, or at the remaining CAC meetings, give us an update on any progress or no progress on these items?
We can ask.
Thank you.
Sure. Next up on the agenda, we have reports from the working groups. So let's start with Debbie, who is chair of the privacy working group.
Thank you, Ed. So I think it's fitting that I go first, seeing it's the working group that's actually not listed in your packet. And there's a reason for that, that many around the table know. The privacy group is probably the shortest-lived working group in the CAC. We had a lot of activity, and I will thank everybody in just a moment. But we had a very important task that was part of the Open Internet Order, the privacy order. Sorry, there's a reason for OIO being on my mind. But the privacy order and the CRA that was passed by Congress sort of put a halt to our work. So the standard privacy notice that we were tasked to complete was no longer relevant to the FCC's privacy rules. So therefore, our work was curtailed. And so the privacy working group has basically no task before it. And I guess, Ed, the privacy group is going to join other efforts at the CAC and no longer be working on privacy for now.
So let's keep that private.
For now, shall we say, Ken, that our group will be looking for other important consumer issues as the Commission seeks our efforts to do. So I want to thank the hard work of the members of the Privacy Working Group. We really put in a lot of time toward the standard privacy notice that we were working towards a June 1st deadline. We were meeting at least every other week, if not more often, to try and come up with a great product. We were, at least 2/3 of the way along in doing that. And everybody who worked on that effort, many are sitting around the table now, put in a great deal of time to do that. Susan and Ken on the phone, and Zainab, Krista, Elizabeth. Who am I missing? I'm sorry?
Lynn.
Lynn from U.S. Telecom, Ed.
Dallas. from PK.
Steve Dallas, who has moved on to another position, and John. Thank you, John, from NCL. So, many folks, I'm sure I missed some, but thank you, everyone, for the work that you did on the working group, and we look forward to other issues that we will tackle. So, thank you.
Thank you. Steve, technology transitions.
Okay. Yeah. So not much to report. Okay. We held a call. One of the requests were made to have someone from AT&T on a call to talk about the status or the withdrawal from the trials. We had that call. And second, we were tasked with getting a presentation with the FCC's point of contact, but that position still remains vacant. So that kind of put a damper on some of that. But where we are right now, so it really there's been little that's been done, but we have 8 topics that were teed up, and we're starting to get a little bit of input from members who are assigned some of those tasks. So at this point in time, I think I'll be circling back with Mark DeFalco, who I don't think is on the call. And he and I will have to just set up a meeting. We'll go back through the 8 issues that were raised, see what the status is, and try to move ahead with the ones that we think are probably bear the most fruit. So really not much to report.
Thanks, Steve. Amina or Olivia, did you guys?
Hi, I'm Olivia. Should I start, or do you want to start?
I'll go for it, Amina.
So we had a short working group meeting today. We chatted about potential recommendations. We are looking into a smaller subgroup within our working group to pull together consideration of a recommendation around a small section of the new net neutrality NPRM that may affect Lifeline. So we're looking into that. We're also keeping an eye on the Lifeline broadband provider process. The chairman's office has indicated an interest in opening up a docket to look into that particular section of the Lifeline modernization order. So we're considering keeping tabs on that. If it does come out, we'll consider putting recommendations together to participate in that docket as well. Right now on E-rate, we're just keeping track of sort of issues around E-rate and potential changes to E-rate. As far as we can see right now, we don't see any open dockets, though that doesn't preclude us from putting a recommendation together. However, I think at this point, we're just sort of in a wait-and-see mode, so we'll be sharing information and looking into it. It may be a good topic for us down the road to get a report from the FCC just to get a sense of where things are headed. The last area was digital inclusion. And this is a little bit more far-reaching, but we've started a discussion around the idea of a more sort of comprehensive approach to infrastructure, cost support, and digital inclusion. So we're looking into, whether or not it would be a standalone recommendation that would come from the working group, something that we would collaborate with other working groups like the IP transition group. If we're talking about things like infrastructure deployment or easing deployment in rural areas or considerations around municipal broadband. And then also we're also considering working with other committees. So we'll be looking into kind of what the best way to kind of work on these issues will be. So those are sort of the top 3 things we discussed during our working group. Olivia?
You got it, Amina.
Thank you. So the robocalls working group, we just passed a successful recommendation, so that was great. We're going to try to carry forward on that momentum. We obviously had a presentation today about the NPRM and NOI that's been teed up. We'll be looking at that for possible areas of recommendation. I think there are a number of other issues in the robocall space that might be good for our group to focus on. Specifically, I'd like to see if there's opportunities to follow up on today's recommendation, whether it's providing specific input about complaint forms and some of the things that we've suggested to the Commission to help make it a little more actionable for the Commission. So that some of these consumer-friendly suggestions can become a reality. So that concludes the robocall update. Does anybody have any questions on the working group updates? Mitzi?
Just for the next meeting and working groups, can you give us a rough idea of when recommendations would need to be completed by, so that we can kind of be working the timeline backwards?
Okay.
Concept 6 weeks.
So the next meeting of the full CAC is scheduled for September 18th. That's a Monday as opposed to our traditional Friday. So based on the 18th, about 6 weeks back, so essentially beginning of August, loosely, we need to have a sentence or two about the concept of a recommendation. Ideally, we always try to have the language of a recommendation 2 weeks prior. Is that correct, Scott? 2 weeks prior. So, right after Labor Day would be the goal to have a text, text completed for distribution and preparation for the full CAC meeting. And as was mentioned earlier today, we can file comments ex parte, so even if we're slightly off from some of the posted comment cycles for things that we're discussing and passing recommendations on, that would still be appropriate for us to provide that input. Do we have any comments from the public? Did you get any in advance?
No.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Before everybody leaves, though, I need your tent card back, if you would, please, so we don't have to reprint them all the time. All right. And by the way, my thanks to Brittany Gomes, too, has been absolutely great helping me support all of you fine folks in your working groups and in the full committee. And thank her very, very much for all her good work.
So quickly, motion?
Oh, okay.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy the weekend.
Yep, enjoy the weekend.